taught some of my lessons when I was a young child sitting in a pew. And when I heard that from Matthew 25, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. Even to the least of these, as you've done to them, you have done to me. I have had an extraordinary journey gifted to me by the state of New Jersey, and I feel blessed to have served as a mayor of a major city for almost 8 years. My experiences there pressed upon me an urgency to try to correct a wrong that has existed pretty much my entire life. Here we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, celebrating this monumental achievement before Lyndon Johnson's pen wrote in ink his signature for this law. We in this room know for that law was paid for by the sweat and blood of our ancestors. And it is anguishing to me to inform you that we as a nation who celebrates this wonderful law, many of us might have concerns about recent Supreme Court decisions like Shelby, but let me point to you the unfortunate reality that in 1976, we had 1.7 million Americans who could not vote as the result of their criminal conviction. But by 2010, that number had exploded to 5.8 million people, more than 30 states. That population, if those people were a state, it'd be greater in size than 30 of these United States. And this twisted reality that we have now, because since my lifetime, we have seen this massive explosion in incarceration, is being visited upon our communities in New Jersey, our state as a whole, and our nation in ways that most do not understand. When I got to the United States Senate, in fact, when I was campaigning, we polled New Jerseyans on their issues, and the issues are understandable. Concerns about the economy, about education, about healthcare. Not in the top 10 of our polling was the issue of criminal justice. But when I was becoming mayor, and I decided that I was mayor-elect, and we did our transition, and we separated our transition committee, which was hundreds and hundreds of Newarkers from all different backgrounds, I was amazed that every single transition committee, the one on public safety, the one on economic development, the one on children's and family, all of them came back with something that surprised my staff and I, that the one of the top issues they wanted us to focus on was the men and women who are formerly incarcerated, and to do something about their re-entering society. It began to make me think, where are we as a city of Newark with 2,000 people coming back from prison every single year, and the challenges that they are facing. And so tonight, I want to, for the few minutes that I have, frame this problem out for you, and then join in with a panel of extraordinary people to have a larger discussion with you about this issue, and not just the parameters of the problem, but how we are going to solve it. So please think about this. We are a nation that is, in population, has only about 4 to 5% of the globe's population. But we have 1 in 4 of the incarcerated people on the planet Earth are in America. We are the incarceration nation. The land that professes to favor freedom and liberty has had this expansive bureaucracy that has now imprisoned more people than anyone else on the planet Earth. In addition to that, it has been fueled by this explosion of the drug war. There are more people today in prison for drug offenses than all the people in prison in the 1970s. Now, that would be problem enough, but please understand that we in this room have witnessed some of the costs of this. We spend about $250 billion a year as a nation dealing with this problem. In my very first meeting as your senator with Attorney General Holder, he bemoaned to me the fact that the Bureau of Prisons, which has grown 800% since 1980, is now squeezing out his ability to spend resources on things that are urgent and important. I don't want to put our U.S. attorney on the spot, but he is being strangled for the resources that he has as we're spending more and more money. For those of you who are concerned about the roads and bridges in New Jersey, concerned about New Jersey transit, think about this. While our infrastructure was crumbling in this nation, we, between 1990 and 2006, were building a new prison in the United States every 10 days. So the cost of this, as legislators like myself in the 1980s and 70s and 90s were racing to put higher and higher mandatory minimums, putting in things like 3 strikes laws, doing everything they could to be tough on crime, that all of those decisions had a very high price tag on them, and were in a sense taking money away from resources that we could have been investing otherwise. But the challenge doesn't stop there. What we were doing to people in our prisons, of itself, is problematic. The people who need treatment for drugs do not receive it like they should. One study showed that only 20% of the people that were needing of drug treatment or support were getting it in prison. Please understand the problem was worse than that, because people with mental health challenges are not receiving that treatment. And in fact, we engage in practices in our prisons routinely in America that other nations look at with horror, that human rights groups consider torture, things like solitary confinement. We put children in solitary confinement when the medical community is almost unanimous with understanding that has a traumatizing effect on a child, that then you put them back on the streets, often more damaged, often more likely to get in trouble. And so what we do behind the bars in terms of preparing people on day 1 for re-entry, we don't do that, and in many ways we're making situations more challenging. And then when someone comes out of prison, what is the world that they go into? I think Michelle Alexander is right when she refers to it. They are entered into a caste system in which we have legalized discrimination against people with a criminal conviction. The American Bar Association has identified 46,000 collateral convictions around the United States that affect the lives of people who come out of prison. We already talked about one. 35 states, you're losing your voting rights. Can't serve on juries. You're pulled out of democracy, so much so that some states in our nation, 1 out of every 5 black men can't vote. But the collateral consequences are more than that. Many states are disqualified from Pell Grants, disqualified from food stamps if you're hungry, disqualified from public housing. It gets worse than that. Places like New Jersey, you're disqualified from business licenses if you want to be entrepreneurial, from many business licenses. You all know this from friends in the community, that even places trying to get a job, like a fast food restaurant for a minimum wage, which doesn't get you over the poverty line in New Jersey, you can't go because you're checking that box. So the challenges we have when you come out of prison, not to mention that you're still paying thousands, often thousands of dollars in fines and fees that you owe that tangle you up, is another one of our challenges. Now, everything that I said would be bad enough, but there's one more element that I want to visit before I conclude. And that's the fact that this system is profoundly biased against poor people and people of color. Now understand that I've been talking about our prisons. I haven't even turned to the jails in America, which have 19 times more admissions than our prisons do. And here, the majority of people are presumed innocent. And those of you who think that we got rid of debtor prisons in the United States hundreds of years ago, we have not. Many people are pulled away from their families, pulled away from their children, losing their jobs, languishing in jails because they don't have the money to pay to get out. And the jails are disproportionately full of poor people, people with mental illnesses, and people with addictions. But let me switch for a moment to African Americans and Latinos. We now know that in America there is no difference in usage of drugs or dealing drugs between the races. In fact, some studies will show young white men have a higher rate of dealing drugs in America. But we now know that minorities are multiple times more likely to be arrested for drug use, arrested for drug dealing, than someone who's not a minority. In fact, African Americans are about 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes than someone who's white. I often remind people that the last 2 presidents admitted to using serious drugs. But yet, we don't see, at least I didn't at Stanford's campus, I didn't see our fraternities being raided for searching for marijuana. They would have found it. And so, being that we have a system that is so profoundly biased and concentrated and focused in certain areas, it is having a massive effect in terms of the racial disparities in incarceration. We now know in the state of New Jersey, blacks make up about 14 to 15%, but African Americans are over 60% of the prison population. The racial disparities in incarceration in this country between blacks and whites are worse than it was in apartheid South Africa. We now have more African Americans in America under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. And so what does this mean generationally for a community when you have so many people being pulled into the system? Well, we now know that children of incarcerated parents, of which there are so many in our country, that even Sesame Street now is beginning. Google this tonight and watch, as I did, with tears in my eyes, Sesame Street being that they need to start doing little skits for the children of incarcerated adults. What does it mean to our nation when we have so many people now and so many children that are being with incarcerated parents? They have a greater chance now of going to prison, greater chance of having disciplinary procedures, greater chances of experiencing poverty. So we need to have a conversation about who we are going to be as a nation, because there is a different way to go, and it is not just speculation that we know the solutions. There are states in America that are recognizing, because their prison populations are getting so expensive, that they're recognizing that they have to do something about it because they can't afford their prison populations anymore. And so you have states like Texas and Mississippi and Georgia who are doing common sense things that to lower their prison population, and guess what they're finding out is lowering as well. Their crime rates are going down. Because if our justice system is just about retribution, punishment, and harm, it actually will have the unintended consequences of creating less safety, less strength. But if our prison populations are about punishment, yes, but also about rehabilitation, about treatment, about empowering people, then we will see a different result. We know right now that we are losing out at about $50 to $60 billion annually in GDP activity and growth because of the undermining of the economic potential of our ex-offenders. We now know that we could be reinvesting that gross amount of dollars in things that not only lower crime, but empower people to succeed. And so we have to have a question. Who will we be as a country? I've been taking recently to telling people that if I could go back in time to the 1700s, and someone could assure me that they would not put shackles on me, that I could have a conversation with our founding fathers and say, would you accept a nation that just on arrests alone, the government taking you and arresting you, that you would have, as we have in America, between 75 million and 100 million Americans now with an arrest record, closing in on 1 out of every 3 Americans arrested. If I could say to our founding fathers, would you tolerate a nation where almost a third of the people are being arrested? Or would you tolerate a nation that is spending this percentage of its resources, public treasury, on incarcerating its own people? I tell you right now that they would put this as one of their list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence. And so my hope and my urgency in Washington is to join with people on both sides of this aisle, because this is not a Democrat issue. This is not a minority issue. This is not a liberal issue. I'm working with conservatives, with libertarians, with Christian evangelicals to join together to begin to make our criminal justice system just again and have it reflect our values. This is a choice. But as I learned in Washington, D.C., and even in our state house, change does not come from Washington or Trenton. Change does not come from Washington or Trenton. It must come to Washington and Trenton by a community of people that are choosing a different path, demanding it, working for it, making the same sacrifices that were made for other things that we celebrate, like our Voting Rights Act. Thank you very much.